Good evening, members. The meeting's about to go live. Thank you.
For those of you who've still got jackets on, if you wish to, you may remove them. Please be seated. Well, good evening, members. I'd like to welcome everyone along to the full council meeting, including members, officers and any members of the public who may be attending and those who may be attending remotely. Please be advised that this meeting will be live streamed and data collected during the recording of the meeting will be retained in accordance with the council's data retention policy. The recording of the meeting may be added to the council's website. The following staff are in attendance: the Chief Executive, Monitoring Officer, Director of Regeneration and Neighbourhood, who's logged in remotely, the Contentious Teams Leader and Democratic Services Officers. Agenda item 1, an emergency evacuation procedure. There are no scheduled tests of the fire alarm this evening, so if the alarm does sound, please leave the building as quickly as possible using the door signed as fire escapes, either to my right here or back through the main lobby. Please don't use the lifts. If there are anyone in attendance that might require assistance in evacuating the building, please make themselves known now, please. Okay, thank you. Agenda item 2, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have received apologies from councillors Carol Jackson, Anne Hampshire, Lee McCall, Ken Pugh, Julian Saunders and Mike Whiting.
And Councillor Knights.
Thank you, Councillor Bonney. Item 3. The minutes of the meetings, minutes of the full, to approve minutes of the full council meeting held on the 30th of March 2020, minutes number 732 to 741, and minutes of the extraordinary council meeting held on the 27th of April 2022, minutes 766 to 770. Do you agree that those are correct record? Thank you. Agenda item 4, declarations of interest. Are there any members that have any declarations of pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests? Okay, thank you. Mr Clifford.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you, just to advise members that a year or so ago, I provided a general dispensation to all members to be able to discuss the members' remuneration scheme. So there's no problems with any of you talking about that. Thank you.
Okay, so agenda item 5, Mayor's announcements. Members will be aware of the recent sad passing of former Mayor Swale Alderman, Councillor Don Jordan. He was aged 90. Mr Jordan served as a ward councillor for West Downs from 1987 to 2007 and as Mayor of Swale from 1995 to 96. Mr Jordan's memorial service funeral took place on Friday, which I had the pleasure to attend to represent the council. I had the opportunity to speak to both his son and his daughter and to a couple of his grandsons. So before I move on with that, would any members like to pay tribute to Alderman Jordan? Councillor Baldock.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I first met Councillor Jordan when I was a parish council representative on the old Swale Rural Forum, and again in 2009 when I was canvassing for the Swale West seat. He was courteous and jovial, but I suspect I did not count on his vote. It wasn't really until 2013, however, when I became KCC member for Swale West at the third time, which at the time did include Rodmersham and West Downs. Don was the chair of Rodmersham Parish Council at that time. We worked very closely on a number of issues. He was always very engaging and never indulged in partisan banter. His love and knowledge of Rodmersham and the surrounding villages was extensive, and I would often stop off for a chat when I was leafleting or otherwise loitering around the village or the pub. It is true to say that he was a fixture of Rodmersham and the surrounding villages, but will be greatly missed by his absence.
Thank you, Councillor Baldock. Councillor Simmons, please.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. I first got to know Councillor Jordan when I first came on to Swale Borough Council in 2002. I didn't know him particularly well, but I always regarded him as being an absolute gentleman. He was always well turned out, always spoke very well, particularly about issues for his ward and about rural issues. He was particularly passionate about the rural part of Swale, and he will be greatly missed. And I send along with the Conservative group, we send our condolences to the Jordan family. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Simmons. Councillor Truelove.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Actually, Don Jordan came to Swale to work at Shell Research. He was a fairly distinguished science researcher, I believe. I think we ought to acknowledge that he was a very considerable presence on this council at the time that David Simmons joined. Throughout the 90s and the whatever we call the next decade, we call it the noughties, don't we? He was, I wouldn't call him a big beast, but he was a considerable presence on the council. And during that time, as well as being a councillor myself, I was also chair of the Cinnamon Community College, and his wife Liz was a very supportive member of the governing body. And so Don knew how interested I was in education and skills development. We were at that time trying to bring forward that agenda on this council, and we were working hard to achieve a further education college in Sidderbourne, and we still are. But Don was actually the cabinet member, and he was very assiduous in always consulting with me on it. That wasn't because he thought I had superior knowledge; it was out of courtesy, I think. But we did discuss that a great deal. I think Don has found the recent years difficult since Liz died, I go up to Robinson Green too. I don't go up like Councillor Baldock and loiter. I usually go up there for a walk, and whenever we did that, Don would come out because he wanted to know what was going on the Swell Borough Council. Well, apart from the obvious charisma of talking to me, but he wanted to stay in touch, and I think we might actually think about that a bit. Whether we get people and we say you can be an alderman and that's it, go away. We're not going to talk to you anymore. It may be a good thing if we tried a little bit harder to keep people who maybe given 20 years to Swell Borough Council, give them a little bit more contact and background. I mean, that's up to parties partly, but I know he was still very interested in local affairs, and as Mike said, particularly concerned about rural issues. So he was 90, he'd served an outstanding career really, and it also was an outstanding councillor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Truelove. Councillor Bonney, please.
Thank you very much. Well, I've known Don for many years, and as also as a resident of Robinsham, he is or was a very big figure in Robinsham. His degree was in agronomy at Reading, and it was through research projects living in Africa and then later coming to Shell Research that he had a really good technical understanding of agronomy and agriculture in our area. He always wanted to chat, as Councillor Truelove said, and you would go round, sit in the kitchen or sit in the conservatory, and he'd be wanting to know all that was going on. And every year would be there without fail when there was jazz on the green. So I know from the elderly residents, long-lived residents of Robinsham, he will be greatly missed. He did a huge service to the village. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bonney. If I can ask members to please stand for a minute's silence. Thank you, members. Further then, just briefly finishing off with my mayoral announcements for this meeting. We had a very busy last fortnight or so, not least with functions for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, of which on the Thursday I attended the beacon lighting and lit the beacon at Playstore in Borden. Saturday, unfortunately, the function that I was due to attend on the island had to be cancelled due to the weather. But then on Sunday, I had three events in quick succession, seeing off a chapter of the Vintage Motorcycle Group, as Councillor Truelove alluded to, which was one of my favourite events of the weekend. Then straight on to a tree planting in St Michael's Churchyard, followed by a very enjoyable luncheon and afternoon of music, dancing and various frivolities at Diversity House. Councillor Davey will back me up on that one, as will both the Deputy Mayor and the previous Mayor. We had a very enjoyable afternoon there. And it's just been getting busier and busier over the last few weeks. I've got several events to attend over the weekend, which I can apprise you of at a later date. Thank you. Right, so we move on to agenda item number 6, leader's statement. I'll ask the leader to read his statement, and then I will ask the leader of the opposition to respond in the usual way. Following that, I will invite other members to respond to the leader's statement. Members invited to speak will have 3 minutes. This item has an overall time of 30 minutes, and to ensure broad fairness, I will try to invite responses from members of the administration and opposition groups in roughly equal numbers. This may mean that I deviate from the order in which members indicate they wish to speak. Please can I remind all members that responses must be in response to issues raised in the leader's statement. I will invite Councillor Baldock to give his statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And this is the first time I've done this, so I don't know if it's going to last 7 minutes, but I shall try to keep it brief. I would like to start by paying tribute to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth on her Platinum Jubilee, and to the thousands of us across Swale who took part in commemorating this unique occasion. Never before has a British monarch reigned for so long, and it is unlikely that anyone alive today will ever witness such a jubilee again. This was a truly memorable event that will live in the minds of those who took part, as much as the events of the Silver Jubilee did in 1977, which have lain in the minds of those of us privileged to have been part of them so many years ago. It is a shame that elements of the local media chose to try and portray Swale as a miserable borough, when there were beacon lightings across the towns and villages, church services and local events galore, and many, many street parties that brought communities together to create lasting memories of this glorious occasion. This council was able to contribute to 41 of those events, with grants totalling £36,500. Next, I would like to mention the government's Levelling Up paper, and my thanks to Gordon Henderson MP for sparing me the time to discuss this in some detail. Although those details are still somewhat vague, there are real opportunities in this paper, and hopefully amendments will come forward during its passage through Parliament that will address many of the concerns we face locally, and indeed across Kent. In Swale, we will continue to work towards a local plan that we feel best suits this borough, and we will be looking towards Parliament for the changes and amendments that mean Kent will no longer face an unsustainable level of house building and the ongoing concerns about the lack of infrastructure that we need to cope with the current levels of housing. The bottom line remains that for truly sustainable communities, we need good jobs locally and the ability to provide local people with the skills they need to access those jobs. People need to be able to live, work and play locally if we are to move away from the reliance on ever longer commutes to other parts of the South East and the accompanying stresses that puts on the health and well-being of those involved and indeed our local communities. Whilst on the subject of the government, I thought I would include an update on the energy rebate payments that we have paid to date. So far, our staff have processed a total of 43,324 rebates, which is 80% of the total we are expecting to award, totaling just over £6.4 million. Of these 43,324 awards, around 39,000 payments have been made to bank accounts and 4,300 credits have been applied to council tax accounts. I would like to pay full tribute to our staff involved in this and the extra efforts it has at times required of them. Tomorrow is the 6th annual Clean Air Day, and I have signed a letter calling for the targets to be strengthened. The theme of this year's event is Air Pollution Dirties Every Organ in Your Body. Take steps to improve your health this Clean Air Day. As Larissa Lockwood, the director of Clean Air, put it, we can all do something to cut pollution to benefit our health, planet and community. Walking short trips instead of driving is a great way to reconnect with our local community, breathe cleaner air and get some exercise. I trust that is something that we can all agree on. Finally, I'm delighted that we have at last begun the work of the new committee system properly. with the first Policy and Resources Committee taking place last week. This is truly a radical change in how we operate at Swale, not just some mere rebranding, as some may claim. And whilst it will take time to bed in and to smooth over all the initial wrinkles, the bottom line remains. You will all get out of it what you put into it. Every councillor has the chance to suggest ideas, make comments and help shape Swale's future policies. If you choose to just sit back and snipe, or obsess about technical matters, or try and play the game by trying to catch people out, or proposing things that are not realistic, just so that you can go running to the press for silly stories, then you won't get much out of it. And you will be doing the people and the communities you represent a severe disservice. But if you come up with good ideas, suggestions for real improvements, different ways of delivering, then we want to hear from you and to work with you, regardless of what group on the council you sit on. It is a two-way street. Let's make it work.
Thank you, Councillor Baldock. I'd now like to invite Councillor Horton to respond.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and can I congratulate the leader on his first statement for this House. He's managed to cover an entire side of A4 of notes that I have taken. I do not intend to respond to all of them, but I will respond to the core message, which is that we are now working in a different way. We are looking forward to working with you in a better way than we have before, and I might come back to this in a debate we will have later on this evening. I can talk about the Platinum Jubilee from a personal perspective. I'm parish councillor in Upchurch, and we had the better part of 500 people turn out to see the beacon being lit. There was a party atmosphere for 2 or 3 hours before the beacon was lit, and at that time, if you went to the church in Rainham, you could actually see consecutive beacons right the way down the Medway, across the Isle of Grain, our beacon, and beyond to Newington. So it was very impressive, and that's what beacons are about. On the Sunday, we had a street party. There's 17 houses in my street and 110 people turned up to the street party, and I still haven't worked out how that happened. Burgers, sausages, salad, intoxicating liquor, light drinks, and a very good time was had by all, and I hope you had the same experience. I talked to people that I had never met before, and I've lived in my town for the better part of 20 years. So it was a really, really good thing. And it was all about celebrating the reign of a woman that, whether you are a royalist or not, you have to admire her commitment to public service. She has given up her life for the benefit of the people of this country and indeed the Commonwealth, and arguably the whole world. So I think that was a fantastic event, and I hope you enjoyed yours as much as I did. Outstanding news on the rebate payments. I think it is unfortunate that the government didn't think through the practicalities of giving out what amounts to a few quid to a lot of people, because that has caused a massive headache. And sometimes what seems like a good idea and seems like a good policy is fraught with difficulty when it comes to the implementation. And I might come back to that again a bit later as well. At our area committee, and there is a connection here, at our area committee last week, we heard from the active travel coordinator, who has got a lot of very good ideas about how we can improve air quality by getting out of our cars and getting on to our feet and getting around town. It was certainly an eye-opener, and if you get the chance to meet and have a conversation with him, I certainly recommend that you do so. I think the final thing that I would say is I'll make the same promise to this leader as I made to the last one. We will support you wholeheartedly when we think you are doing something right. And we will point out to you when we think you are doing wrong, and we will explain why. If that falls on receptive ears, then we have the potential for a really productive relationship. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Horton. I now invite other members to respond to the leader's statement. Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Leader, you picked up under levelling up and the local plan and the need for good jobs locally and the training to make people capable of doing them. I'm sure you will know that the government's apprentice scheme is not working. It certainly isn't working as well as it needs to, and it certainly isn't working as well as it could do. And that has to do with the apprentice levy, the method of funding and all sorts of other things. But may I ask that you include in the pressures of the next 12 months anything which this council can do to improve the take-up of apprenticeships. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just following suit to a couple of previous speakers about the Platinum Jubilee, and I totally agree with the comments that have been made, but unusually I want to express my thanks to the work, particularly in this case, and we've all got our parish councils and all the events that occurred, and thanks to everybody who took part, not only took part, but made them happen, because they're not easy things to make happen. And I want to particularly pay tribute to the work, finally, of Tenham Parish Council, who not only have managed to arrange a Platinum Jubilee celebration, but also timed it with the development and revamp of a playing area in Tenham on the Meadow by the Village Hall. About 6 weeks ago, it hadn't even started, and they opened it on the Platinum weekend with a member of royalty actually coming down. So we celebrated the Platinum, the new play area, in one event. And thank you to the Parish Council of Tenham for doing that. Well done. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Bowen. Councillor Truelove.
Very pleasing to hear that the leaders had discussions with the constituency MP for Sittingbourne and Sheppey on levelling up. I think it's always important that we recognise there's a distinction between our specific levelling up bid for Sheerness and the general agenda for levelling up, which is another discussion. Do you think the MP gets that there's still a danger of levelling up being regarded as moving resources to the north of England and to the Midlands, and neglecting the fact that there are places in the southeast, and particularly ourselves, where levelling up ought to be as much a priority as it is in Wigan or Huddersfield or Hartlepool?
Thank you, Councillor Truelove. Councillor Martin, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will join with others in giving commendation for the work that was put in by our communities and parish councils in delivering what was a very good Jubilee weekend. I ended up, for my sins, escorting the Mayor of Faversham around for most of it. That's the trouble when you get your old man elected to a parish council. But it was a case of trying to get from one street party to the next, and quite the journey it was too. But it was good to see so many people enjoying themselves, and in particular on our new developments, people who hadn't met each other before coming together to celebrate. And I think we have to appreciate, there was mention in the leader's statement of the additional housing that we have had, but we mustn't forget that those are people in those houses, and they form communities, and they join our communities, and they become one with our community, and we must make sure that they are welcome. With regard to levelling up and meeting with the MP for Sittingbourne and Sheppey, could I ask the leader whether he has had a similar ability to contact the MP for Faversham and Mid Kent, who represents the other side of the borough, and also ask that in doing so, and in speaking with our MPs, pressure is placed to abandon this ridiculous notion of further extension of right to buy, a policy that, quite frankly, just results in reducing the amount of social and affordable rent housing available at a time when we desperately need it. It's all well and good saying that for every one that is sold, another will be built to replace it, but actually you don't get enough money to build one. And that's in that levelling up paper. And it's just an absolute nonsense policy, similar to the £150 rebate, in terms of it will just make far more work for little or no result. Other than that, I commend the leader for his statement to this chamber.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Hampshire, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was very interested to hear about the leader of the council petitioning one of the MPs for the borough about how infrastructure is much needed to be improved, and particularly with a focus on commuting. And with that in mind, though, it should also be noted that COVID has actually changed the working world for a lot of people in many ways, and that it's actually not just about rail or road infrastructure, but also high speed and reliable internet connections, particularly for our rural areas. So I just wondered whether, those points were put across. But with the rail strikes likely to happen next week, what is the position of the council's leader, and what conversations is he having with our MPs to make sure that the government does all it can to prevent those strikes? Because in a cost of living crisis, when people are really struggling, the last thing they can afford to do is take a day off work. And unfortunately for some, that could actually be the consequence of a whole week of no train services or unreliable train services in the southeast.
Thank you, Councillor Hampshire. Councillor Bonney, please.
Thank you very much, leader, for his statement. I would like to comment on the Jubilee celebrations, which I think were a great success across the borough. And I think coming out of COVID, where a lot of people were fairly reticent about attending events, it was great that most of these were outdoor events. And what his view is for the future, that hopefully that this has built some community bridges, certainly within communities. And I totally concur with what Councillor Horton said, is meeting people and communities that haven't been circulating or socialising in any meaningful way over the last few years. And talking of COVID, is the flexibility of local government to deal with COVID and the severe impact on the council's finances going forward, is that I hope that, and does he share my view, that hope that the axe doesn't fall on local government finances, because if we have to cut staff, that would impact any ability to deal with any future pandemic, and it's outfall. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bonney. And in order to comply with the 30 minutes, Councillor Harrison will be the final speaker. Councillor Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And on that last point, it hasn't gone away. COVID, it is rising. I think more people need to get their masks back on because they're getting complacent. I'd like to congratulate the leader and the administration on making the grants available for the Jubilee events. In some cases, it facilitated stuff which would not otherwise have happened. I would also like to say, if I don't agree with you, leader, I won't be sniping, making snide comments or telling downright lies. I will come up and tell you in words of one syllable. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. Forthright as always. And finally then, Councillor Baldock, would you like to respond?
I think I'm limited to 5 minutes on this, aren't I? 3? Okay, well, first I'd like to thank the Leader of the Opposition for his gracious comments and support, and I think it would be a very useful thing if we were to meet soon and regularly to discuss events of the council and ensure that this does indeed work. Councillor Henderson mentioned the apprentice scheme, and this council pays a living wage to its apprentices rather than the rather measly £4.81. I can assure him that I will be including this in future talks with our MPs. I think apprenticeships are vital in actually learning skills and trades, and where it's not working, there needs to be reform. It is a vital part in equipping our young people for the future. Councillor Truelove asked me to read the mind of our local MPs to see whether I think he gets levelling up. I'm not actually sure the government gets levelling up at times. I do believe our MP is genuinely interested and sees this as a great opportunity. Whether or not it meets our hopes and aspirations as a council and as a borough in Kent, time will tell. But I shall feed it back as with meetings with him what we are hoping to get from it. Councillor Martin, yes, I am indeed meeting the Faversham and Mid Kent MP in 2 weeks. I will indeed ask her about abandoning the right to buy. I shall rely on him for some information that I can pass on to her to focus and get the very nub of the question that he's asking, as it isn't an area I'm specialised in, but I appreciate the councillor is hot on that area. Councillor Hampshire, yep, COVID and broadband, it is something that's important. I don't know if you voted for Mr. Corbyn when he was promising us all free Wi-Fi, but in the event that he didn't get elected, we must do our best with the current government. And yes, there is a rail strike. I don't think I'll be wasting our MP's time by saying that I think they should do some work. I rather suspect they're already doing the best they can and don't need to spend half an hour with me telling them to do what they're already doing. I do have some faith in our local MPs on things like this. I hope that he does too. Councillor Bonney, yes, indeed. The Act's not falling on council funding is a huge issue because it has been falling for the last few years repeatedly, and it just means that increasingly councils are unable to deliver the services that people rely on. It means that, especially with a council tax cap, we cannot tackle some of the bigger issues. And frankly, if there was another COVID lockdown, the way things are going, would we be able to do as well? I'm not so sure. It was a huge ask of councils on fairly limited funding. We did get a lot back from the government, but if that act keeps falling on council funding, we do have to look at a future where council services get cut back. KCC are feeling the pinch quite a lot, and you'll have noticed that in their roads. So it's something that we need to speak with a united voice. The Local Government Association does, and we will continue to lobby the government for decent funding. And Councillor Harrison, I'm glad to see that in a period of change, there will be no change in your ability to tell me exactly what I should be doing, why I should be doing it, and when. And I look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baldock. So we move on now to agenda item number 7, questions submitted by the public. There is one question submitted by a member of the public, Sonia Jackson. In the absence of the chair of the Environment Committee, Councillor Julian Saunders, the question will be answered, I believe, by Councillor Valentine. Is Ms Jackson present, either online or no? Okay, well, I do have a copy of a question here, which I shall read out. Given the need to increase biodiversity and reverse the alarming decline in insects 60% decline since 2004, according to the recent report from Kent Wildlife Trust and BugLife. And in the view of the urgency in mitigating the dangerous effects of climate change, as acknowledged in Swales Climate Emergency Declaration, what action is the Council going to take to pressure the relevant parties against further installation of artificial turf and plastic grass in Swale, the increasing use of which results in pollution through its whole life cycle, from the manufacture to the shedding of microfibres, the creation of a sterile environment hostile to all forms of wildlife, and eventually the end of life disposal through incineration or landfill. What action will the Council take to demonstrate to Swale businesses and private residents that their action in relation to the use of outdoor spaces can have a positive beneficial effect in reversing the loss of biodiversity?
Point of order, please, Mr. Mayor. I don't think we generally take questions from people who aren't here, do we? I think we normally just send a written response. Perhaps we could save Councillor Valentine the duty of doing so.
Councillor Valentine, do you wish to reply verbally, or would you like to reply in a written response to Ms Jackson?
I'm happy to give a verbal reply.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. The increased use of artificial turf and plastic grass is a concern to the Council. Unfortunately, there is little we can do to limit its use beyond our own estate. There is only one instance where artificial turf is used by the Council. This is for the dressing of graves in cemeteries, which we manage. Between graves being dug and the coffin being lowered, the sides are protected with artificial turf. After being removed, the turf is cleaned and then reused. We get many uses from the same piece of turf. We are considering use of alternative materials. Elsewhere, our estate is artificial turf free. The requirement for biodiversity net gain should stop larger developers from considering the use of artificial turf, but the main installers are householders. The Council does not have any legal powers here, but it can play a role in educating residents about the impact of artificial turf as part of the work it does in promoting biodiversity. More generally, the Council shares your concern about the decline in biodiversity and is taking action to improve biodiversity in the borough via our Climate and Ecological Emergency Action Plan. We have committed to the following actions: to minimising the use of pesticides and herbicides in our own estate and have reduced the number of cuts of grass to enhance biodiversity, to establish a baseline of trees and woodland on council land and develop an action plan to increase tree cover in Swale. Last winter alone, 5,000 whips and 32 mature trees have been planted on council land. We will be planting 6,000 more trees during the next winter. To use planning policy to improve development outcomes which support recreation, access to green spaces and climate change adaptation and mitigation. To ensure the installation and maintenance of landscaping in new developments to contribute to biodiversity net gain via suitable conditions or Section 106 agreements. To encourage coppicing of council woodland to promote biodiversity and the use of local woodland products. For example, coppicing in Perry Wood has been increased to meet the targets in the Woodland Management Plan. Timber is used locally to produce fencing products. And to engage the community groups to support tree planting and conservation work in Swale. And to support Swale in Bloom, working with schools, community groups, voluntary groups, and town and parish councils to enhance local habitats and wildlife corridors, improving biodiversity across Swale. The council has been awarded funding for a second Big Green Week in September, which will promote actions to enhance biodiversity to the public. Council runs the Green Grid, a forum for community groups, NGOs and parish and town councils to keep up to date with projects on biodiversity and climate action across the borough. Participants are kept in contact with a regular Green Grid newsletter. The council has also made environmental grants available to community groups for biodiversity enhancement.
Thank you, Councillor Valentine. And could we make sure that Ms Jackson gets a copy of the response, please? Thank you. We now move on to agenda item number 8, questions submitted by members. Was one question received from a member, but the question was also asked and answered via an Ask the Leader facility on the council's website. The question has therefore been withdrawn and there are no further member questions. So agenda item 9, a review of members' allowances scheme. The next item on the agenda is the review of the members' allowance scheme, which recommends the council adopts the scheme proposed by the independent remuneration panel. I invite the leader, Councillor Baldock, to introduce the report and propose the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, my job to recommend this, propose this recommendation. I have to admit, I'm not the greatest fan of the independent remuneration panel. I do think it's invidious that the leader of the main opposition gets a cut. I have said in the past that I think that he should get more, or that position should get more. However, duty calls, so I would like to propose the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Baldock. I'd then like to invite Councillor Monique Bonney to second and ask whether she wishes to speak now or reserve her right.
I'd like to reserve my right, please.
Thank you, Councillor Bonney. Sorry, members. I understand that Councillor Baldock would like to propose a slight amendment to the recommendation as it stands. From discussions I've had with group leaders outside of this meeting, I believe that this amendment could be conducive to enabling the council to articulate a common position on this matter. On this basis, I am happy to use my mayoral authority set out in section 3.1.16.4 of the Constitution to waive the usual requirements for amendments to have been notified in advance. I'd therefore like to invite Councillor Baldock to propose his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and for your indulgence. There are loads of amendments I wanted to make, but this is the only one I'm allowed to make. And that is on page 6 of the report. It says leader of the smaller opposition groups. I'd like, the amendment is that we remove the word smaller. I'd like to remove the word opposition and retain the word smaller. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
That could have been embarrassing, Councillor Baldock. Okay. All right. Right. We have a seconder for that proposal. So I'd like to now ask Councillor Horton, would you like to speak on the amendment?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Councillor Bonney, for seconding that. This is all about fairness. If we pay a remuneration to the leaders of groups of 5 or more, it shouldn't make the slightest bit of difference whether that person is in the administration or the opposition. So for me, this is fundamentally about fairness, and I completely support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horton. Do any other members wish to speak on the amendment? Councillor Henderson, did you wish to? Okay, thank you. Right. Councillor Baldock, do you wish to exercise your right to reply on the debate?
I do not.
I'd now like to ask members to vote on the amendment. All those in favour, please show. I think that is right. Thank you, members. Anyone against? Abstentions? 2 abstentions. Thank you, members. Right. So we have the result. The amendment is carried. So we now return to the debate on the substantive recommendation. Councillor Horton, would you like to speak at this stage?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is the 3rd or 4th time I've talked on a recommendation from the independent review panel on remuneration for councillors in this council. My position has not changed. It should not come as a surprise to you. The independent review panel is there for a reason. Nobody likes the thought of councillors in any council voting for their own pay rises, but it is reasonable and appropriate for us to have increases in the remuneration that we receive. So to me, it makes perfect sense to have an independent panel work that out for you, and I think you therefore are obliged to accept their findings. And what I absolutely don't think we should do is cherry pick the bits we like. I think you take lock, stock and barrel the recommendations of the independent panel, and that then leaves us free to get on and do our jobs. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Horton. Right, I'd now like to open up the debate for members to speak on the main recommendation. I have Councillor Henderson first and Councillor Perkin.
Yeah. Could I initially ask a question, but I would then like to ask if you would consider taking a further amendment on this, Mr. Mayor. I was not able to put this in advance because for reasons I won't bore you with, I didn't see a copy of the agenda until this morning, and because of my short-sightedness, I find it very difficult to read these agendas on computer. But let me ask the question first of all: why is it that the audit committee that meets 4 times a year carries an SRA for the chair? The 4 area committees which meet 4 times a year carry an SRA for each of the chairs, and we've just dealt with the leaders of smaller groups on the council, which perhaps is not so relevant. I cannot understand, therefore, why the Standards Committee, which also meets 4 times a year and is at the moment, I should say, probably significantly more active than the other committees I've mentioned, doesn't not only warrant an SRA, but it doesn't even warrant consideration of whether an SRA should or should not have been provided. It is not mentioned in the entirety of the report. So may I ask the question first and then ask your indulgence in making an amendment if appropriate?
Yeah, Councillor Henderson, I think Councillor Baldock can sum up on your question at the end. On this occasion, I am prepared to allow you to propose your amendment if you should so wish.
I'm most grateful in that case, Mr. Mayor. Can I therefore propose that the Chair of Standards should have an SRA equivalent to the Audit Committee and the area committees, because it carries a broadly equivalent or indeed potentially greater workload. It has considered its workload already for the year, and it has a lot of things on its plate. And I ask, using Councillor Horton's words, that we consider fairness in all of this, and that would be a fair proposal to make, and I hope that members will support it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Do I have a seconder for that amendment? Councillor Palmer, thank you. Right, Councillor Perkin, you wish to speak? No. on the main, I'll call you back in on the main substance. Councillor Harrison, is it on the amendment or the main body of the?
Be very difficult to that it was on the amendment because I put my hand up before it came up. I mean, I can say it now because it's relevant, but it's up to you.
Okay, I think, well, does anyone wish to speak to Councillor Henderson's amendment? Councillor Baldock?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Henderson. As we are allowing this amendment, I think it's filling an oversight that the independent panel didn't consider. The point is very well made. It's a well-working committee that does a lot, and we can cover it within the budget. So I would be happy to support the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Baldock. Councillor Hunt, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just before we go to the vote, can we be clear on what the amendment is proposing for the what actually the allowance is? Thank you.
I did make that clear, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, well, if we're looking at the SRA for the chair of the audit committee, I should know this because I was chair of the audit committee until I took over as mayor, but it's £2,036 per annum currently. Well, that is the current. Yeah, currently, well, the SRA will be £2,036, which is 12% of the leader's allowance. So that is what we. Councillor Dendall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to clarify. With Councillor Baldock. He said it's probably an oversight by the independent panel. I just wanted to clarify that because we have said that we would stick to what the panel said as much as possible. I'm happy that if we feel they simply didn't think about it, but if they did and discounted it, I wouldn't be happy.
Do we have anyone else who would like to speak to the amendment? Councillor Horton.
Thank you. I don't think I've spoken on this amendment, have I? No. I thank Councillor Henderson for pointing out what appears to me to be an oversight. I do not recall that we have ever paid the chair of standards, and it could be argued under the previous structure, you were paid a responsibility payment, and there could be an argument what was the responsibility of the chair of standards. But if we are moving to a committee structure where there is a requirement to manage and look after the agenda of a committee and run that, it seems to me entirely appropriate that we recognise standards in the same way that we do the other smaller committee meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horton. Councillor Baldock, did you wish to make any comment before I take to the vote?
No, just very briefly to say, in response to Councillor Dendor, the independent remuneration panel didn't say not to pay it, they just didn't comment on it. As has been pointed out, it hasn't been paid in the past. Of course, the chair of the Standards Committee in the past was a deputy cabinet member, so wouldn't have claimed an SRA for it, was already getting one. But beyond that, I have no further knowledge of the mind of the members of the independent remuneration panel.
Thank you, Councillor Baldock. Right, I'll now take this to the vote. All those in favour of the amendment to allow the Standards Committee chair to receive an SRA? Right, any against? Abstentions? 4 abstentions. Thank you, members. So that amendment is carried. So we now move back to the substantive part of the debate. Councillor Perkin, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to pick up on page 22 at 4.5. There's a recommendation that we approach putting in a parental leave policy. That is something that the council did a little while ago. Myself and Mr. Clifford worked on putting that together, and that went through SMT, and that was already agreed at the council. So I don't think we need to progress any further with that recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perkin. Councillor Harrison, please.
Yeah, I thought I'd chip in on this, Mr. Mayor. This is all about, we've reviewed allowances because there's going to be a new way of working, but we've had experience of doing it in other authorities. I'm sure you have. With a cabinet system with a select number of members, by the very nature, obviously, and we found this out in the last 3 years, well, basically, you are available day and night. And I think I need to flag up. I'm not getting at anybody for anyone says, well, it wasn't my fault. In a committee system, we go back to how we were previously, which is that members work, they toddle along here in the evenings if they possibly can. I know now we've got this, so actually they don't even need to toddle along unless they want to vote or we need their votes. But I think that we need to actually flag up that, oh, can you do 2 o'clock? Can you do 10 o'clock? You know, that needs to be pulled back, because if we are to encourage a diversity of candidates in the future, we can't rely on them either being unemployed, we've got a problem with benefits, retired, which is really not very good for demographics, or you know, rolling in money. There's not many of them people in Swell. So I do think I'd like to flag up that whilst we're looking at, this is the monetary side of it, the remuneration, we need to look at the whole picture. And as I say, I'm not getting at anybody, but this business of members being available day and night, I can remember when we had committee system, one of my own groups saying, no, Angela, if you're having if you're going to agree a 5 o'clock committee meeting, you are discriminating against me because I can't get down from London in time for it. So you either have it 7 o'clock or, you know, I shall complain to the whip. So, you know, we do need to look at these things going forward. I mean, it's okay for basic committees, but if you are taking on responsibility as part of that committee, I don't mean chair, but I mean doing other bits and pieces, then and being spokespersons, you know, being expected to pop in at 10 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the afternoon for a briefing on X, Y, and Z. I'm just flagging up that actually, if we're going back to a committee system where we should be inclusive of a large majority of members of this council, then we need to look at that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. Councillor Simmons, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I fully support the recommendations of the remuneration panel. I just wanted to say a word or two about the proposals which came from the working group, which took a fairly simplistic view. As you can see, if you look at under item 3, the proposals, where we kind of worked in whole thousands, and I must say I was fascinated by the panel's calculations. No doubt one of them's a mathematician. It's the sort of thing that Ted Wilcox would have come up with. Professor Ted Wilcox, for those of you who don't know, who was a bit of a mathematician who would always find the shillings and pence in everything. What we did, and in answer in a way to Councillor Harrison, was we acknowledged that the committee system will actually mean more work for all councillors. I think Councillor Baldock said earlier, it's the sort of thing you'll get out of what you put in, but in reality, I think pretty well all members of the council will find they've got more work, which is why what we did was we worked out what each of the chairmans and various people should get, and then say, well, in that case, we'll divide what's left in the pot, we'll divide by 47 to give us a basic members allowance of somewhere in the region of 7,500. So I'm not quibbling about that, but I just think it's important that perhaps members realise what was behind the figure that the working group put forward. And I'd like to just ask a question of the leader. In response to the first amendment, he said that we could do it within the existing budget. Do we know if this proposal, this recommendation from the remuneration panel, is lesser or greater than the previous budget? And if you can't answer that question, I'm happy to receive a written reply afterwards. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Simmons. Any further comments or questions? Councillor Marchington.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Going back to the earlier point made about parental leave, could I have some clarification, please? Are you asking, because on page 22.453, the first bullet point states that the basic allowance gets paid for up to 6 months in case of absence for parental leave or sickness, and also in the next bullet point is the special responsibilities also get paid for 6 months due to if they're parental leave or sickness. So is the suggestion to increase that or to add figures to that? That's my what I wasn't quite clear on. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I ask Councillor Baldock to respond, is there any further comments or questions? Councillor Baldock, would you like to respond to those points and sum up? And then I'll take it to the vote. Sorry, Councillor Bonney, would you like to speak now? Or
yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I will support the recommendation. I did respond to the independent remuneration panel, and I think I quite agree with your comments about some odd numbers, and I think they emanate from 4.110, and that is the full-time wage per hour as the average across Swale. And I think for many of us who work, it doesn't reflect actually the salaries of those in the borough, because many work outside of it, normally within the confines of Kent or London. So I do think it artificially actually lowers the overall calculation. However, we have to be somewhere. But what we do know going forward is that every member will have far more time, a more higher requirement of time spent either in the chamber or on the phone on a call, attending meetings, whether you're a member of a committee or actually part of working groups, which is going to be quite a large part of the committee system, the functions of getting our work done. So we do need to adjust these rates, and I will agree with the recommendations and be voting for it.
Thank you, Councillor Bonney. Councillor Baldock.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for all the contributions. I've got to answer them. Very briefly, actually, as brief as I can be. David, Councillor Simmons, yeah, I'd like to thank you for bringing up the efforts of the working group. I actually preferred our proposals. I thought they were much better, but you know, we got overruled. But thank you, and thank you for the members of the working group who worked ages on that. Regarding the overall cost, I'm advised that the total cost, including the second amendment, is less than the previous SRAs payable. Councillor Marchington asked me some difficult questions. Thanks. So I'm framing this carefully, but I have been advised that the payment is the same SRA as the job that the person was doing before they go on parental leave, and the person who takes over will also get the same SRA level.
The Chair, I understand that.
But you do. I'd just also like to say there has been comments made about people working. We have to remember our staff work. We don't want our staff having to feel that they have to work every night. And we also have to recognise that we are in a slightly different world these days. Not all jobs are 9 to 5. We have people who work in pubs, people who work in shops, people who work in a whole range of industries, which can sometimes include night working, lorry driving. We have a flexible 24/7 workforce out there now. And whilst I'm not yet proposing a 24/7 approach to meetings, yeah, I could be here on my own at 3 o'clock. Not core it. Yeah, we have to look at the broad range of people that we have in our borough, and all of which we would like to feel could be councillors in the future. But apart from that, yep, I'm happy to, well, not happy, but I will propose the recommendations. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councillor Baldock. Right, so I'll now take with both amendments that the council adopts the members' allowance panel, members' allowance scheme proposed by the independent remuneration panel, obviously with the 2 amendments intact. So all those in favour? Any against? Abstentions? All right, so thank you, members. So that most recommendation is carried. Right, so we now move on to agenda item number 10, appointment of an access and disability champion. The next item on the agenda is to create and appoint an appointment of an access and disability champion. I invite Councillor Baldock to introduce the report and propose the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is not new. A lot of councils are doing this, and I think it's right that we, leading on from what I said just a moment ago, that we look at ways that we can include more of our people in the decisions that we make, and include more of the experiences and concerns of as a broader range of people when we're making those decisions as possible. And I think this is a really positive step. Not really sure why we haven't done it before, to be honest. So I hope it will get support tonight, but we can appoint an excellent person for this role.
Thank you, Councillor Baldock. I'd now like to invite Councillor Bonney to second the motion and ask whether she wishes to speak now or reserve her right.
I'll reserve my right, please.
Thank you, Councillor Bonney.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And before I do, if I could just formally accept the invitation that the leader extended to have regular meetings to discuss these issues. Can I clear one thing first of all? I fully support the need to consider those with disability in our policies and the workplace, but I think making a quick decision here tonight is not good policy and it's not good in action. Some things that I just want you to consider. This wasn't on the forward plan. We haven't had this job for years. The administration has had 3 years to do this and hasn't. The Conservatives had an awful lot longer than 3 years to do this and didn't. So why do we now need to do it straight away without necessarily thinking through the implications? There is a certain irony that the first paper in our committee system hasn't involved any backbench input at all. We haven't had any conversations about this. We haven't thought through the issues and we haven't thought through the implications. I do accept that other councils have done this and I agree that they should. But did they do it without any thought and preparation and consideration of the issues before they started? Let me put something out there for you to reflect on. If we were seeking a champion for women's rights across the borough, or a champion for ethnic minority rights, or a champion for different cultures, religions, or LGBTQ+, how would the communities feel if they said, we're going to do it from one of the 47 people in this room? Certainly, I do not think the women in this room would appreciate a man being the champion for their issues. So why is it acceptable that we do this for people with disabilities? If we think about other champions, we have armed forces champions. Some councils don't have people in the council who have been previously in the armed forces and they open it to staff. So there is an opportunity for us to be wider in our thinking than just the people who are on the council. Disabilities are almost as varied as there are people in the world. But what do we know about what it's like to not be able to see, to not be able to hear, to have mental health problems, to spend your life in a wheelchair? The list is almost endless. I've taken a straw poll, spoken to a significant number of disabled people since this paper was published. And the feedback that I got from them was insensitive, ill-informed, pretty patronising, and one actually said it felt like tokenism. I'm pretty convinced that nobody in this room wants those as the outcomes of this policy. So why are we rushing into it when we could do this properly? And I'll come back to that in just one moment. But finally, if you still believe that doing this way right now is the best that we can do for our community, then I'd ask you to give some thought to who the person would be. Our nomination said at our group meeting, I have been both. I've been able-bodied and now I'm not. Able people miss the little things. Wise words from a councillor respected right across this chamber who you know would do the job properly. But I want to submit a motion without notice under section 3.1.15, subsection 4, to refer this to a service committee. I leave it to the proposer to determine which is the most appropriate committee. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Horton. Do I have a seconder for councillor Horton's proposal amendment? Councillor Dendor, thank you. And well, fight amongst yourselves. Okay, we'll say that the official seconder is then councillor Tatton. Councillor Henderson.
Can I just question that? There is a proposal on the floor to decide on this paper. Councillor Horton has made an alternative proposal, and as I understand it, you can't have two proposals at the same time, and it can't be considered as an amendment because it's a direct negative. So I just asked what we're doing here.
Yeah. Mr. Clifford, please.
So thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. So the Constitution sets out a set range of motions without notice, which can be put without notice and which are effectively are able to be put even while there's a proposal on the table. So I think this is a reasonable thing for Councillor Horton to put on the table. I just think it needs to be voted on without discussion, then we move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clifford. So without any further discussion, I'll put Councillor Horton's proposal to the vote. All those in favour? Those against? Any abstentions? Right, so that proposal is carried. So that agenda item at the discretion, I believe, of the leader to choose which service committee will look at this proposal. Not now. I'm just advising you, Councillor Baldock.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry to interrupt you before you've actually announced the agenda item, and it may just be my papers, but it says 7 appendices to follow. I've had no appendices to follow. Has anybody else?
No. Not everyone provided nominations, so that's why we're doing it this evening, Councillor Truelove. I've been informed.
No, I'm sorry. The appendices should include anybody who did make a nomination. I made a nomination, therefore it should be in an appendix, just as it should have been at P&R last week. Okay, the appendix is to indicate any prior nominations. I made one, that should be in an appendix.
I take your point on board, Councillor Truelove, but we will be asking for nominations this evening.
Absolutely, there's no question of that. But it should not say on an agenda that there's an appendix to follow with information that could have been in the appendix and it wasn't published. And it's the second time in a week that's happened.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Truelove. Do take on board your comments and your points, and the officers have heard them. Right, so we move on to this agenda item. The next is for Swale Borough Council's nominations to the Kent Health and Wellbeing Board. There is one seat to fill. I would now ask any group leaders, do you have nominations from your groups? And I will go to Councillor. Are you related to Zebedee?
I would like to nominate a very fine councillor who's given years of magnificent service to this council and has shown an expertise in this area equal to nobody else on the council. I'd like to nominate Councillor Harrison.
Thank you, Councillor Truelove. Are there any other group leaders wishing to nominate? Councillor Horton, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just for the information of the member opposite, we did notify in advance and would have expected it to have been on the same appendices. With the one exception that I called the individual Pate Neil, and his name is actually Pete Neal. I will leave it to you to speculate why his nickname is Pate. But the nomination from the Conservative group is Councillor Neil, who has an experience of the health service from the inside and we think would make a valuable contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horton. Do I have any nominations from other group leaders, please? Right. We have two nominations for Councillor Harrison and for Councillor Neil. Do I have a seconder for Councillor Harrison, please? Thank you, Councillor Martin. And for Councillor Neil? Councillor Simmons, thank you. Right, any further nominations from other groups? I did. Okay, so we have a direct vote between Councillor Harrison and Councillor Neil. Can I ask all those in favour of Councillor Harrison, please show. And those in favour of Councillor Neil? Well, you never know. We'll just have a quick glance. Thank you, members. That is carried in favour of Councillor Harrison. Okay, so that members and ladies and gentlemen in the public gallery brings us to the end of this evening's full council meeting. I thank you for your forbearance, and before I close the meeting would like to invite members to the Mayor's Parlour for some drinks if they wish to do so. Thank you. Meeting closed at 20:25.